Are you tired of struggling with muddy, cluttered sounding mixes? Do you want to create mixes that are clear and balanced and full of life every single time? Then you need to learn about the single most important mixing tool you have. And I'd be willing to bet you haven't even heard of it. Hey, I'm Dean, and this is Quick Start Music, and today we're going to talk about an often overlooked but incredibly important part of your mixing toolset. Maybe you think having the latest plugins or expensive hardware is the key to making a great mix, or you need to spend all your time mastering EQ and compression. But even though gear is great and those tools are so important to the mixing process, there's something you need to master first, and that's gain staging. Now, don't be surprised if you've never heard those words before. It's not something that comes up often in a lot of beginner tutorials, and it's not something you see in plugins or DAWs labeled there on the screen. It's really a habit and a practice that you need to get into to ensure you're getting consistent, fantastic results from your mix every time. We're going to cover exactly what gain staging is and how you can apply it today in your mixes. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe for more videos like this one posted every week. So what is gain staging? Gain staging is the practice of making sure the volume of your audio is at the right volume level at every step of the process. That's it. It sounds simple, right?
Isn't that just like leveling? Like setting the volume of tracks?
Well, no, it's not just the volume of your track at the fader. It's the volume of your audio between every single element in your signal chain, going from the audio itself into the EQ, from the EQ to the compressor, from the compressor to the reverb, and any other steps along the way you may have. It's also the volume of each track going into any submix tracks you have, and then those submixes going to your master track. Good gain staging practice means managing this volume at every step of the way, so you get consistent results from your mix every time. Let's take a look at some examples so we can see exactly what that means and how you can start applying gain staging today. So in this example, I have a snare drum with a compressor on it, and I'm going to use this compressor to add a lot more room sound to the snare, bring a lot of the reverb forward in it. To do that, I'm using a short attack and a short release. If you want to learn more about how to use compressors, I made a video all about that. I'll put a link up in the cards here so you can check it out. Just so we can hear what the compressor's doing, here's the snare sample before and after. You can hear it's really bringing forward that reverb sound. So I've got my snare set up exactly how I wanted, but I've decided I need to use an EQ to help it fit better in the mix. Now, this is kind of a ridiculous extreme example just to help you understand what gain staging is, but let's say I want to cut out all the lows from this snare drum. I just don't want them in there. Now, because I've cut so much sound out with the EQ, the volume going into the compressor is actually lower than it was without the EQ. Take a look at the difference in the peaks that you're seeing in the compressor with the EQ on and off. Here's the EQ on and off. Notice how much more activity we're seeing in the compressor when the EQ is off. That's because the EQ is actually lowering the volume, meaning the compressor isn't getting hit as hard. The volume of the input is hugely important to any effect that deals with volume, which is most of them, but especially compressors. So here's my first rule of gain staging. If an effect changes the volume of a sound going through it, adjust the volume afterward so it's the same as before. So what I'm going to do is play this snare sample and watch my compressor and take note of how different the sound is with the EQ on or off, and try to match it by adjusting the output gain of the EQ. Check this out. So obviously a lot louder, right? And there we go, I've got it matched. So we're getting the same results from the compressor now because the same volume is going into it. So just remember, anytime you use an effect that changes the volume of a sound, make sure the volume of the audio coming out of the effect is the same as the volume going into it. Let's take a look at another example. Let's say I've spent the time setting up my compressor exactly the way I like it. I love the sound it's giving to this snare drum, and I want to use these exact settings on another snare drum in another song entirely. So I save this as a preset. This is the best snare ever. Cool. And now I can just use that wherever, right? I'm going to go over to my other song here. These are very short songs. And I'm going to put the best snare ever on this track. That doesn't really sound anything like the other one. I know they're different samples, but I was at least hoping for that same kind of big, punchy, roomy sound, right? Well, why do they sound so different? Let's take a look at the graph. We're getting a ton of compression here, while on our new one, almost none at all. What's going on? Well, that's because the input volume is totally different. This sample is so much quieter than the other one. Take a look at that waveform. It's huge compared to this little one. So we need to raise the volume of this sample until we're seeing the kind of results we want. Or we can adjust our threshold to see the same kind of gain reduction. So here's rule number 2 of gain staging. If you're using a preset or copying settings between tracks, either adjust the source material to be the same volume as the sound you made the preset with, or adjust your preset so you're getting the results you want on the new sound. So we know the volume of a sound going into an effect is a huge part of how that effect sounds. And we know good gain staging practice is the way to make the most of that on a track. But what about in the bigger picture, in the context of a whole mix? If you want to get consistent results from your mix, you want to work with consistent parts. Think about cooking. Recipes don't just say, add some chicken, add some butter, add some salt. They'll get specific with real measurements. It's important to know how much of each ingredient goes into the final dish so you get consistent results every time. And the same is true for your mix. When I'm mixing a song, I tend to group similar instruments together, like all my drums will end up on a single group drum track, so I don't have to think about each one individually all the time. Same goes for all my rhythm guitars, my lead guitars. I had an orchestra in this song, and then here's some special effects, like a sub-bass drop and some noise sweeps. And then all my vocals are over here. And I like to make sure that each of these pieces fit together consistently by having each of them start at -12 decibels. This doesn't have to be an exact science. You can just adjust the volume of the tracks within each group, or use a utility tool like a trim plugin to change the volume of the track until it's sitting around -12. There we go. That's pretty decent for drums. I'm going to do the same for my bass. In this case, I'm just going to use the last EQ plugin I put on the track. Anything that lets you adjust volume is great. Now guitars. I'll use a trim plugin for this one. It doesn't have to be exactly -12. It could be any number you like, as long as it's something consistent that you stick to as a practice. Oh, the lead guitars don't even play in this section of the song, so I'm not even going to worry about them right now. Get out of here. Here, I'll adjust the volume using this EQ. It's actually already pretty close. And finally, our effects. These are a little special. I tend to add effects last, so let's mute those for now. Now I have a consistent starting point to mix from, and at -12 gives me enough headroom to mix these up or down in any way I want. Now I'm going to apply the concepts of balancing to make sure I can hear everything I want to. If you want to get more extreme and ensure you have super consistent volume throughout your entire mix, you can even put a limiter on the end of each of these tracks. L1 is always a classic. For this, I'll literally set it to -12 and then pull this up until it's just under where most of the peaks for the track lie. And now I get really consistent -12 volume coming out of this. I'm going to apply it the same for this track. Just adjusting it until I'm sitting just under the peaks for the threshold, and my ceiling is at -12. Notice how I'm not just literally copying and pasting. I have to adjust this for each one, because the signals are different. That's what gain staging is. So now I have super consistent pieces to work with. This is like measuring your ingredients when you cook. You don't always have to, and sure, you can kind of eyeball it, play it by ear sometimes, but having a specific practice, a specific habit you're in every time you mix goes a really long way towards getting consistent results. Just be careful not to overdo it with the limiters. It can be easy to go overboard and end up crunchy and cluttered again. Use them in moderation. Now, I know I mentioned it earlier, but I need to hammer it home just how much using presets can give you really inconsistent results if you didn't make them yourself and you're not incredibly careful about introducing the exact same kind of signal into it every time. This is why it's so important to learn how tools like compressors and limiters work so you can adjust those presets to fit your sound and get the results you're looking for every time, instead of just throwing on someone else's settings that were made on a completely different piece of audio and just hoping it works. Sort of like putting on a perfectly tailored suit that was made for someone else. It might fit, but it's probably going to feel a little off. Gain staging is such an important part of the music mixing process. It means keeping track of the volume of your audio between every link in your signal chain and making sure you're sending consistent volume through every one every time. But that's not all you need to know to make great sounding mixes. There's another crucial concept that'll take your mixes to the next level, and that's how to properly use an EQ. And I'm willing to bet you're not using it right. Check out my next video to find out why. Make sure to like and subscribe for the latest music production tips posted here every week, and head over to quickstartmusic.com to check out our full music production courses. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.